Angela Price was 41 years old the night she stood in her own driveway with a bag of drugstore snacks for an overnight shift and heard her husband laugh into his phone, low and easy, and tell his friend Trey that marrying a woman who worked 3 jobs was basically like having his own personal ATM. Everyone who knew the Bishops believed they understood the arrangement perfectly well. Angela taught kindergarten during the day, tended bar 3 nights a week at a hotel downtown, and spent her weekends managing a small rental duplex in Whitehaven that everyone assumed was just extra income from a property management gig. She drove a 12-year-old minivan with 200,000 miles on it and packed the same turkey sandwich 5 days a week. Malik's friends called her the hardest working woman in Memphis, and Malik laughed along every time, because a wife who never stopped moving never had time to ask where the money actually went. For 4 years, she had funneled almost every extra dollar she earned toward the $350,000 in debt left over when Malik's restaurant collapsed. Certain the balance was finally shrinking the way the loan servicer's letters implied it should. What Malik never thought to explain, not once in 4 years, was why that balance had dropped by only $41,000, despite nearly $200,000 of her own money going toward it. What none of them knew, not even Angela's own sister, was that the small duplex Angela managed on weekends wasn't a job at all. It belonged to her, free and clear, left by her father, and its rising value had quietly outpaced the very debt she was breaking her body to pay down. What happened after that phone call would cost Malik far more than an insult. It would cost him the version of Angela he assumed would always show up for the next shift. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. 5 weeks earlier, on a Saturday morning, Angela had been on her knees in the downstairs bathroom of the Whitehaven duplex, regrouting tiles she'd laid herself 2 summers before, when the light came in just right through the small window and caught the dust hanging in the air. Her father, Otis Price, had bought that duplex the year Angela turned 10, back when he was still driving a delivery route by day and studying property listings by lamplight at night. A woman who knows her worth doesn't negotiate it down, he used to tell her, usually right after some contractor tried to lowball an estimate on his rentals, thinking a black man with a modest truck wouldn't know better. Otis always knew better. He'd left the duplex to Angela outright when he passed, along with a folder of maintenance records so thorough she still used his system for her own tenants. A decade later, Malik came by that afternoon to pick her up for a family cookout, and he complimented the grout job before he'd even stepped all the way inside. The way he always noticed the polish on things without asking what they'd cost her in time. He was wearing new sneakers she didn't remember him buying, and when his phone lit up on the counter, he turned it face down with a motion so smooth she almost missed it. "New shoes?" she asked, nodding at his feet. "Had a work bonus come through," he said, already reaching for his keys. "Fantasy football app," he added, nodding at the phone, before she'd asked anything about it at all. She hadn't asked. She had only looked at it a beat too long, and he'd noticed her noticing, which was, in its own way, the first time in years either of them had acknowledged the other was paying attention. Only her cousin Renata, who managed the rent collection paperwork for her on the side, and the county tax office knew that the LLC listed on the duplex's deed, Price Properties, belonged to Angela alone, entirely separate from anything she and Malik held jointly. It wasn't a secret so much as a detail that had simply never come up in 9 years of marriage, the way a foundation never comes up until the day something above it starts to lean. She had met Malik 12 years earlier at a friend's birthday dinner, back when he was 26, and talking with his whole chest about the restaurant he was going to open one day, a Southern fusion spot with his grandmother's recipes done up properly. He'd sketched the layout on a paper napkin before dessert arrived, walked her through where the bar would sit, and how the kitchen window would open onto the dining room so people could watch the plates go out. And she remembered thinking she'd never met anyone who talked about a dream with that much specific, stubborn detail. He'd been funny and specific, and had actually followed through, 2 years later, opening Bishop's table to a write-up in the local paper and a line out the door on weekends. That version of Malik was real. She had never doubted the ambition. She had only slowly stopped believing the follow-through was still in there once the restaurant folded and the debt collectors started calling instead of food critics. Her phone buzzed on a Tuesday evening with a notification from the loan servicer. A scheduled payment had been returned for insufficient funds. Angela stared at it for a long moment. Since she had handed Malik the cash for that exact payment herself 4 days earlier, the way she did every month, folding the bills the same careful way her father used to fold his rent receipts. She almost called the servicer right then from the car, before deciding she wanted the full history first, not just an explanation for one missed payment she suspected he'd already have ready. Her hand stayed steady on the wheel of the minivan in the school parking lot. Something had shifted, the way it does right before a wall shows its first hairline crack, and she did not yet know the shape of what was coming, only that it was already underway. She didn't ask him about the return payment that night. Instead, she called the loan servicer herself the next morning during her planning period, gave her information, and asked for a full payment history going back to the original loan date. The representative emailed it within the hour. Her hands didn't shake reading it in her classroom during lunch. Of the roughly $190,000 she had handed Malik over 4 years specifically earmarked for that debt, the servicer's records showed barely half of it had actually reached the account. Always in the minimum required amount. Never a penny more. No matter how much extra she'd pressed into his hand some months, hoping to finally make a dent. Interest alone had eaten most of the difference between what she'd given and what had arrived, compounding quietly in the background while she picked up extra bartending shifts, believing every dollar was chipping away at the same fixed number. She sat with that spreadsheet open for a long time after the last bell rang, tracing 4 years of Saturdays she'd spent behind a bar for strangers' tips instead of home with her own family, and felt something harden in her chest that had nothing to do with anger yet. It was closer to recognition, the specific, clarifying kind an engineer might feel looking at a crack she'd been told for years was cosmetic. She found the rest of it 3 nights later, not by searching, but by picking up his gray hoodie off the laundry room floor to wash it and feeling a folded cardstock rectangle in the pocket. A Players Club statement from a casino across the state line in Tunica, showing monthly visits stretching back over a year and a running total of losses that made her sit down on the edge of the dryer. Her face remained perfectly calm. She folded the hoodie the rest of the way and put it in the wash. She did not confront him. She photographed the Players Club statement. She pulled 3 more months of their joint checking activity and found cash withdrawals timed suspiciously close to every payment she'd handed him, always just under the amount that would have made the loan servicer whole. She discovered, buried in a stack of mail he never let her sort, a second personal loan for $15,000 taken out in his name alone 8 months earlier, its monthly payment quietly eating into the same account she thought was only feeding one debt instead of 2. She cross-referenced dates the way she'd learned to grade tests, methodically 1 column at a time, and found that nearly every casino visit landed within 48 hours of a payment she'd handed him in cash. 4 years of calculated shortfall unfolded in front of her, longer and more organized than she had let herself imagine, and by the time she laid it all out on a single spreadsheet, it read less like a struggling family climbing out of a hole, and less like bad luck, and more like a man who had simply found a second use for his wife's overtime. She heard the rest of it standing in the driveway with a bag of gas station snacks for her overnight shift, close enough to the open garage window to hear Malik laughing into his phone, telling Trey that marrying a hardworking woman was basically like having his own personal ATM, one that never asked for a PIN. She stood very still. She had no idea, 5 weeks earlier, kneeling in that bathroom, regrouting tile, how close she already was to the end of pretending she hadn't noticed anything. She went inside, put the snacks away, and did not say a word to him that night. She opened a folder on her laptop and named it, simply, Otis. Then she called her Aunt Loretta, her father's younger sister, the one person in Memphis who had never once been fooled by Malik Bishop. Monica Ferris's office sat above a coffee shop on Poplar Avenue, small and unglamorous in a way Angela found immediately reassuring. Monica had built a reputation in Shelby County for family law cases involving hidden assets and hidden debts alike, and had a habit, Angela would learn, of asking exactly one uncomfortable question before anyone had finished getting comfortable. She read through Angela's spreadsheet, the Players Club statement, and the second loan documents without a single change of expression, the way a careful woman reads anything that might eventually need to survive a courtroom. When she finished, she set the folder down evenly and said only, "You've handed me a stronger case than most attorneys get handed." Then she asked one question. "Do you know whether your name is actually on that original $350,000 loan?" Angela said she'd always assumed it was joint. "Then that's the first thing we confirm," Monica said, "because if it isn't, you've been paying down a debt for 4 years that was never legally yours to carry in the first place." She was right. The original note, once Monica pulled it, carried Malik's signature alone, personally guaranteeing a business loan taken out 2 years before the wedding. 4 years, Monica said, almost to herself, rereading the date. He let you believe you were both climbing out of the same hole the entire time. You were the only one actually digging. Aunt Loretta met her 2 days later on the porch of the house Angela had grown up in, the one Otis had kept immaculate until the day he died. Loretta was 68 and had never once softened her opinion of Malik for anyone's comfort. She told Angela that Otis used to say, toward the end, that he worried Angela worked so hard proving her love that she'd stopped checking whether it was being returned in kind. "Your daddy built 4 rental properties out of a delivery route and a library card," Loretta said. "He didn't do all that so a man could gamble away what you were breaking your back to fix." She squeezed Angela's hand once. "Some debts aren't yours to pay just because somebody hands you the bill. Let the paperwork remind him of that." The counter-evidence came from a forensic accountant named Renee Okafor, a colleague of Monica's who specialized in matrimonial finance and who took one look at the casino statement and the cash withdrawal pattern and asked for a full year of banking records. What she found made the picture worse than an insult. Malik had been diverting roughly a third of every payment Angela gave him into the casino's mobile betting app, chasing losses with money meant to save them both, while the second personal loan had been used in part to cover minimum payments on the first so the servicer's letters would keep sounding hopeful. Renee's report ran to 16 pages. Its conclusion ran to one sentence. This was not a man overwhelmed by bad luck. This was a man managing 2 debts by quietly creating a third. 3 days after Renee's report landed, Aunt Loretta called with one more piece nobody had gone looking for. Trey's wife, who'd never much cared for Malik either, mentioned in passing at a hair appointment that Malik had asked Trey for a short-term loan the month before. Quietly, the kind of favor men do for each other without their wives ever hearing about it. Monica added a request for that record too. "Every thread we pull," she told Angela, "makes the next conversation shorter and the settlement cleaner. That's worth the extra week." The night before the meeting, Angela sat at her own kitchen table and put together a single page she'd never shown anyone but Monica. The appraised value of the duplex, the LS paperwork, 4 years of rent rolls, and the quiet, unglamorous investment account she'd been feeding $10 and $20 at a time since before she'd even married Malik. It wasn't a fortune. It was hers, built slowly and entirely on paper, in her own name, and for the first time in years she looked at that number and felt something closer to pride than exhaustion. Through all of it, Angela kept working her 3 jobs, kept handing Malik the same monthly contribution, kept behaving, for 3 more weeks, like a woman who suspected nothing. She cooked dinner on her one night off and asked about his day. She let him talk about the restaurant he still swore he'd reopen someday, once things turned around, and nodded in the places she always used to nod. "You've been quiet," he told her once, studying her over his plate with something almost like suspicion behind the words. "Long week," she said. 3 jobs will do that." He nodded and let it go, the way he always did, because a wife who never raised her voice had never once given him a reason to look closer. When he mentioned, almost carelessly, that he might ask her to pick up a 4th shift some weekends to help get ahead of things faster, she only said she'd think about it, and refilled his glass the way she always had. She had already stopped thinking about anything of the kind. By that Friday, Monica had a formal meeting scheduled at her office, framed to Malik as a conversation about consolidating the debt into a single manageable payment. The conference room above the coffee shop on Poplar Avenue was smaller than the one Malik had clearly been expecting, and by 5 that Friday afternoon, it held more people than he'd been told to plan for. He'd worn his good blazer, the one from the restaurant's opening night, expecting a straightforward negotiation about lowering his monthly payment. Maybe a handshake at the end of it. Instead, Renee Okafor sat near the window with her 16-page report squared in front of her. Aunt Loretta sat with her arms crossed near the door, watching him the way she'd watched him at exactly one Thanksgiving 9 years earlier. And across the table, beside Monica, sat Angela, a folder of her own in front of her that had nothing to do with the restaurant loan at all. Malik walked in expecting a negotiation. He walked in and found a reckoning instead. "Sit down, Malik," Monica said evenly. And he did, because the alternative was standing alone against a room that had already made up its mind. Monica laid the documents out one at a time. The original loan note, his signature alone, guaranteeing the debt 2 years before the marriage even began. Renee's forensic report, the casino app withdrawals highlighted beside the loan servicer's minimum payment history in a red plain enough that Malik's own hastily retained attorney leaned forward to read it herself. The second personal loan, its balance still climbing. And last, a 1-page financial statement Angela had prepared herself, showing the appraised value of the Whitehaven duplex, the LLC that had held it for a decade, and a modest but steadily growing investment account Malik had never once asked about, because he had never once thought to ask what she did with money that wasn't handed straight to him. "You called me your ATM," Angela said, her voice even and unhurried, in front of a friend, like it was a joke. "You weren't wrong that I never asked for a pen. I just finally decided to check the statement." Malik's face moved through several stages in under a minute. Confidence first, then confusion, then something closer to fear. The way a man looks when he realizes the account he's been drawing from was never as bottomless as he assumed. He reached for the original loan note and read his own signature twice, as if a second look might make it joint after all. "Angela, come on. We're a family. Whatever's on that paper, we built this together. You built a restaurant on your own signature 2 years before I said a single vow," Monica said. Everything after that has been your wife paying down a debt she was never legally responsible for, on top of a debt you were creating in secret the entire time she did it." Malik looked at his own attorney, then at Angela, searching the room for anyone who might still be on his side, and finding no one. He tried a softer angle next. "You don't understand what it's like, watching something you built fail in front of everybody. The casino, that was just a way to blow off steam. It got out of hand, that's all." He reached for her hand across the table, and she moved it out of reach before he touched it. "You can't just decide 4 years didn't count for anything," he said, quieter now, almost pleading. I've been trying to fix it." "You were fixing a bet on a Tuesday, not a debt," Aunt Loretta said from the door before Angela had to. "Your father-in-law built 4 properties without ever once asking someone else to cover for him. You had a woman doing that for you, and you spent the extra on a slot machine app. That tells this whole room exactly what kind of trying you were doing." "I know what the payment history says," Angela said. "I know what Renee's report says. And Monica will make sure the court knows it too. You had 4 years to see what I was capable of building. You saw an ATM instead, because that was easier than seeing a partner. That choice belongs to you now, along with every dollar of that $350,000, since it turns out it was always only ever yours to begin with." She closed her folder, stood, and walked out of the room without waiting to see whether his face finished falling. She had no idea, regrouting tile in that bathroom 5 weeks earlier, that she was already this close to the end of carrying a debt that was never hers, or that the driveway conversation she'd overheard by accident would turn out to be the last thing Malik ever got to say to her, without her having the full picture in front of her. She did not look back. Behind her, the room stayed quiet except for the sound of Malik's own attorney sliding Renee's report an inch closer to him. 6 months later, the Whitehaven duplex had a new coat of paint on both units, and a third property added to Price Properties, a small brick bungalow 2 streets over that Angela closed on using nothing but her own name and her own approved financing. She had dropped down to a single job that spring, the kindergarten classroom she'd always genuinely loved, once the bartending shifts and the weekend juggling were no longer required to fund a debt that was never legally hers to fund. Her investment account, modest for years by design, had crossed a number that would have seemed impossible to the version of her regrouting tile alone on a Saturday morning. And she'd started a small scholarship in her father's name for first-generation homebuyers in Whitehaven. Its first recipient closing on her own starter home that fall, with Angela standing beside her at the signing table. She had a new person in her life now, a quiet contractor named Desmond Alcott, who had bid the paint job on the duplex and asked her, unprompted, whether the tile in the downstairs bathroom was original, because the grout lines told him someone who actually knew what they were doing had laid it. He didn't need to be the center of any room. He noticed the work before he noticed anything else, the way Malik once had, except with Desmond the noticing never stopped there, and never once felt like a performance he was running for her benefit. Word of Malik's situation reached her the way most things did now, secondhand, without her asking. The divorce settlement left the full $350,000, plus the second loan, in his name alone, exactly where the original paperwork had always said it belonged. His wages were garnished within the year once the payments lapsed again, and the casino app, according to Loretta's hairdresser Grapevine, had never once stopped pulling at him even after the settlement made the losses entirely his own to absorb. Trey stopped returning his calls not long after the story made its way around their old friend group, and Malik's own mother, who had once bragged about her son's restaurant to anyone who'd listen, told him plainly that Otis Price would have seen exactly who he was in about 5 minutes, and that Angela had simply given him 4 extra years he never deserved. Angela heard all of it once, registered it, and went back to her classroom on Monday morning the same as always. She did not call anyone to celebrate. She did not need to. On a Sunday that fall, she sat on the duplex's back steps with coffee cooling in both hands, watching the morning light move across the tile she'd laid with her own hands. And she thought of her father's voice one more time. A woman who knows her worth doesn't negotiate it down. She hadn't. Not anymore. She was free. She was solvent. She had built every bit of it herself, on paper, in her own name, exactly the way he'd taught her to. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.